Here we go. From the Silver Creek Studios, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac. On this week's episode, we've got spring training coming up right around the corner, so I thought we'd get a little twist on the spring training topic. But first, I'd like to invite you to contact the show on Twitter and Instagram at BFIBs Almanac. You can email bfibsalmanac@gmail.com and find us on YouTube, BFIBs Almanac Podcast. And if you're interested, I've got another podcast, Get a Load of This, with a couple friends of mine. And we talk about anything and everything, all kinds of content and topics and questionable material and funny material and nostalgia and who knows. So if you're interested, check out Get a Load of This. All right, let's get into spring training. So we've got pitchers and catchers reporting in just a few days, February 13th. And we've got full squad reporting about a week from now on the 18th. Actually, I think a lot of players are already down there starting their workouts. Pitchers, position players, everybody's showing up early. There's a lot of excitement this season and high expectations from fans and players alike. And I think it's going to be a fun spring training to see how some of the new guys, Goldschmidt and Miller, pan out. See how some of the guys who we had question marks with their health, how do they look? How does Carpenter do at his, quote, new position of third base? But all that being said, even though there is some excitement around the team, it's kind of a sort of a dull time right now. As much as we have high expectations, the projections for the team aren't all that great. Fangraphs has them projected to be 86 and 76. For reference, last year they finished 88 and 74, so they've actually got them coming back a couple games. They've got the Cubs projected ahead of them at 88 and 74. Now, I don't put too much stock in Fangraphs projections because it's really based on a lot of things that tend to never play out. They weigh in the projected WAR for players who may not even make the roster and all kinds of things that just generally don't play out. But a lot of times those projections do end up being pretty close, especially when fans think the team is better than they really are. Some of these internet sources tend to be a little more objective than we do. But even with some of the big moves that the team has made, like I said, Goldschmidt and Miller, fans kind of expected more moves. I remember when they were even talking about trading for Goldschmidt. That was kind of back at the beginning of the Bryce Harper talk this offseason. And a lot of people thought they could end up doing both, getting Goldschmidt and Harper. And thought that we could get Andrew Miller and another guy like a Craig Kimbrel or even the other lefty, Zach Britton. There was all this talk about, hey, why do we need to stop at one offensive player? Why do we need to stop at one relief pitcher? There's still some really good free agent starting pitchers out there, free agent relievers out there. So some fans are, and I'm one of them, I wish they would have made at least another big move. I think they could afford to. I think they could use it. They're counting on some things that I think are probably unwise to count on, like the bounce back of Dexter Fowler and the health of Wainwright and the health of Ozuna. If all those things pan out, then everything's fine. But can you really expect all those things to work out? We've got uncertainty in the rotation, uncertainty in the bullpen. Like I said, uncertainty with some of the outfield spots and Fowler and Ozuna. So there's just sort of this, as much as excitement as we have, there's an uneasiness too. Just the overall camp. I think spring training's kind of got this a little bit of a weird vibe this year in that we don't exactly know who's going to make the squad. We kind of do. We really know what that starting lineup's going to look like, and who the bench and everybody. There's only one or two spots that are up for debate. The pitching staff is a little questionable as far as who's going to be where in what role, But all that being said, I thought it would be neat to go back in time to see one of the best players to come out of spring training as a Cardinal. So last Friday was when single game tickets went on sale for the Cardinals. And a lot of people were getting online to order their tickets to see the Angels come to town for Albert Pujols. This is the first time that Pujols and the Angels have been in town since he left in free agency after the 2011 season. So a lot of people wanted to see him. A lot of fans, he's, I'm sure, going to get a standing ovation. I'm sure there's going to be some boos. But in honor of the single game tickets going on sale, and I'm sure the push for tickets to the Albert Pujols Angels series, I thought it would be neat to kind of take a look at when Albert Pujols made the team out of spring training in 2001. To kind of put some perspective on that, we need to look back at when he was drafted. He was drafted in 1999 in the 13th round out of Maple Woods Community College near Kansas City. At the time, the Cardinals offered him a $10,000 contract, which I believe he turned down. Now, part of the reason for being drafted in the 13th round, which is about halfway through the draft, and getting a fairly small signing bonus, was there were questions about his defense, his weight, he was a little bit heavy, and his age. He was from the Dominican Republic. There were legitimate questions about whether or not his age was accurate, whether he was older than he said he was, or maybe older than he knew he was. I know that goes on sometimes. These guys in some of these impoverished Latin American countries don't even know how old they are. They're going off of what somebody said. You're 6 years old, and from then on they go off of that. So, but he was a prolific hitter in high school and in his season at Maple Woods Community College. But with all these questions about, how would he fill out his defense, he played various positions, but that's why he dropped. And scouting wasn't what it is now back then. We didn't have all these advanced sabermetrics. We didn't have all the digital video to go off of and everything. You might see a little blurb about him in the local paper, and that was about it. So it was a different time in evaluating players. But that being said, he did not sign, and he played in another league and was putting up crazy numbers there. And the Cardinals upped their offer to $66,000, up from $10,000. And he ended up signing, I believe, in August of '99. So he missed what would have been, that summer of minor league ball. So he made his professional minor league debut in 2000. Where he started in Class A, Peoria, single A, batted .324 with a .389 on-base percentage and .565 slugging in 109 games. So in about, 2/3 of the season, he was already putting up insane offensive numbers. He only had 38 walks and 37 strikeouts in 395 at-bats. The 37 strikeouts being the key there. So less than 10% of his at-bats were strikeouts. You would have liked to have seen his walks go up, but including 21 games at A+ Potomac and 3 games at AAA Memphis, he got called up to Memphis at the very end of the season. He ended up batting .314, .378 on base, and .543 slugging with 19 home runs and 96 RBI for the season. So most of that was at single A ball, but at the end of the year, he got called up to Memphis, and actually Memphis was in a playoff push, and he ended up being the PCL, Pacific Coast League, postseason MVP. So even though just had a few games in Memphis, he helped the team get to a deep postseason run and was the MVP of the postseason. But still, nobody had really heard of him in 2001 when he was invited to a non-roster invite to spring training. Like I said, he had only had 3 games in Memphis, and, there weren't many guys on the team who had played with him in AAA. Nobody to say, hey, you really ought to get a look at this young kid from Memphis. He was playing single A ball, several levels removed from most of the guys who were up on the spring training roster. So obviously, management knew who he was. But most of the big name stars, Mark McGwire, Jim Edmonds, they didn't know who this kid was. And so he was invited to spring training, but at that point, the team was expected to be very good. The 2000 team had won 95 games, was in first place that season in the Central. And so coming into the 2001 season, there were high expectations. We had a lot of big stars, big names on the team. Big Mac, Jim Edmonds, J.D. Drew, Edgar Renteria, Fernando Vina, Placido Polanco, Mike Matheny was the catcher, and a newly acquired player, Bobby Bonilla, 38-year-old outfielder. The pitching staff was equally impressive. Matt Morris, Darryl Kyle, Woody Williams, Andy Bennis, Bud Smith, Dustin Hermanson. We even had Rick Ankiel, who pitched a few games for him. I think that was after some of his control issues. He was trying to come back. So that 2001 roster was full of a lot of good players, a lot of firepower, good pitching, good defense. They were expected to be, a first place division leading team. So not a lot of room for some young kid barely played in Memphis to make the lineup. But it was Albert Pujols, and he found a way to stick. In his first intra-squad game of spring training, he hit a home run and a triple. He kind of hit the ground running, so to speak. La Russa was, if you recall, kind of hesitant to play young guys, much not only in spring, but on the regular season big league squad. He didn't like to commit to young guys. He didn't like to count on them. He preferred veterans in almost every case. Now, there were several exceptions to that, but he was a veteran heavy guy, and almost with a smirk on his face, he would not commit to and praise and reward young guys. But he did also in spring. He was hesitant to use Albert too much because of that, but also he played him all over the place. Left field, right field, third base, first base. He got many opportunities to DH, to pinch hit. He kept earning it, and they kept putting him back out there, but it was always in sort of limited occasions, just because Tony just really didn't want to commit to some young kid who hadn't earned it yet, right? You got to earn it. But by the end of spring, on March 23rd, 10 days before the season started, Albert had a .351 average. Of his 12 hits, 8 of them were extra base hits, and by the end of spring, he had 3 home runs. So he continued to prove himself every chance he was given. And but even so, the last week of spring, last few days of spring, he was assigned to the minor league camp when they start to divide up the players, who's going to stay in the big league camp, who's going to go to the minor league camp, which guys are going to get cut, which guys are going to get a chance to maybe make it on the last day, whatever, right? So he was assigned to the minor league camp. But the newly acquired Bobby Bonilla, I would call him a star player at the time, was 38, was aging, and had pulled his left hamstring. And so we had an opening for an outfielder, and Albert got the call. So he started opening day in left field, and by the time Bonilla came off the DL, Albert had been hitting .346 and slugging almost .700. Not an OPS, not on base plus slugging of .700, which some guys do. He was slugging .700. So I would expect, I didn't look up his OPS or on base at the time. If his average was .346, his on base had to be probably .400 or higher. Slugging almost .700, you're talking about over .1100 OPS, which is just crazy. He went on to finish the season with a .329 batting average, a .403 on-base percentage, a .610 slugging percentage, with 37 home runs, 130 RBI, All-Star appearance, Silver Slugger Award, and the Rookie of the Year. And oh, by the way, he was 4th in MVP voting. For a rookie, incredible numbers. So to put some of that put his career into perspective, we all remember how good he was as a Cardinal, right? But maybe some of us forget just what he was able to accomplish in those first 10 seasons. So from 2001 to 2010, he ended up playing the 2011 season here too. But those first 10 seasons, which was possibly the best start of anybody's career of all time in Major League Baseball, he was second in WAR, wins above replacement, second to only Ted Williams. Now, another stat called win probability added, WPA, takes into account all kinds of things, but it's how much did you, like it sounds, add to the probability of winning that game with your offensive stats. I think it's supposed to take some other things like clutch hitting into account and whatever, and it's weighted to average as opposed to compared to replacement players. So anyway, he was first in WPA, which that stat only goes back to 1950 based on the information that was available. But second place on that list is Mickey Mantle. So he's first, Mickey Mantle's second. And there's another stat called situational wins added, which is supposed to take into account the pressure of the situation, late inning, runners on, whatever. Again, those stats go all the way back. And he's first place in that. And by a large margin over some of these all-time great players. Now, he over his first 10 seasons had a 300 average, 300 plus, 30 home run plus, 100 RBI plus every season, which is the longest streak, not only to start your career the first 10 years, the longest streak of any 10-year stretch ever in baseball. Batting over 300, more than 30 home runs, 100 more RBI. Second on that list is Lou Gehrig with 9 consecutive seasons, and third on that list is Babe Ruth with 8 consecutive seasons. So Albert started his career with 10 consecutive seasons, longer than anyone had ever done in any stretch of their career. So again, you think of the first few seasons of your career, you're maybe not playing all the time, you're not used to the pitching, you're not used to the rigors of the road and all that. So a lot of these guys don't start out on fire their first few years. It takes them a couple seasons, even the stars, to become what they eventually become. And then to sustain that for 10 seasons is very difficult. Obviously, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig only did it for 8 seasons, 9 seasons throughout their career, and Albert did it for 10 at the beginning of his career. So just crazy to think of just how good he was and for how long from day one, from the first intra-squad game of spring training through making the team on opening day to rookie of the year by the end of his first season to 10 years later, breaking records that Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle and all these guys, doing things that even they didn't accomplish. So, I think most people were aware of just how good he was, but some people weren't. Not everybody's aware of just what we were able to see and experience as a fan of the Cardinals and Albert Pujols during his time here. Now, that being said, there have been other guys who have kind of been highly regarded spring training prospects. Colby Rasmus was in that famous 05 draft. Oscar Taveras was known as the next Albert Pujols. And even last season, Jordan Hicks he's kind of this is going to sound not fair, but I would say he's the closest example to Pujols as far as making the team out of spring training when no one even really knew who he was or thought that he would make it. Now, it's a little different with Hicks because I do think he kind of had a reputation. Some people, especially, the baseball aficionados, they knew who he was. You got this kid who can throw over 100 miles an hour with filthy. But Hicks had never pitched above A ball. I think he pitched A plus ball for a few games, and he pitched in the Arizona Fall League. But, A ball, A plus ball was the highest level he had pitched at. Got an invitation to spring training, much like Albert. Wowed everyone with his ability, and also took advantage of some injuries that we had to the pitching staff and made the club out of spring and never looked back. So he never played Double-A, he never played Triple-A, and he probably won't. Barring some bizarre performance this year or an injury or something, he'll probably never get sent back down to Memphis. So that would be the closest comparison that I can think of a relatively unheralded player forcing his way onto the roster, much like Albert did in 2001. So, kind of interesting. I'm curious to see if we have any case like that this year. I can't really think of anyone offhand who has an obvious opportunity, but that's just it. Albert, nobody really knew who he was. Nobody was talking about him going into spring training. We didn't have an obvious spot, an open outfield position, sort of like Hicks last year. Now, maybe with him, we kind of knew there were some injuries going into spring. We didn't have Greg Holland right away in spring. So, but you can kind of see the writing on the wall, the tea leaves, so to speak. We've got an aging right fielder in Dexter Fowler. We've got a potentially injured left fielder in Ozuna. Now, he's supposedly healthy, but he's down there now, just now starting a throwing program. So you kind of never know how that's going to go. He could have a setback. So that would be kind of where I would expect if somebody was going to come along and surprise us. We do have pieces in place already to fill those positions. We've got a Tyler O'Neill. We've got a Jose Martinez. We've got some guys that had a cup of coffee last year in the big leagues, Adolis Garcia. So, I wouldn't expect some no-name guy to come in and wow everyone and take a role like Albert did or Jordan Hicks did. But you never know. Like I said, there's a couple places where you could maybe see it happening. So keep an eye out for a young stud in spring to kind of wow everyone and see if he can force Mike Schilt's hand and get him onto the roster. So that's all I've got this week. I just thought we'd go back and reminisce a little bit about Albert's time in his first spring training and how he kind of wowed everyone and forced his way onto the team. In honor of the single game tickets being available, get online, order your tickets now, go to the ballpark, check out Albert and the Angels when they come into town. So let me know if you have any special thoughts or memories of Albert in spring training or any other stuff about Albert. I'll post some things on Instagram about him and the team. But let me know what you think. You can get a hold of us on Twitter and Instagram at BFIBs Almanac. Send us an email. Check us out on YouTube. Until next time, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac.